Never occurred on Facebook. You are live. Hi, everybody. Very happy to introduce Tom Fletcher. Do you want to start everyone off with an intro to you and your books?
Great. Well, thank you for having me on, and thank you to everyone for joining me tonight. We launched The Assassin today, so this is like the after party, if you like, or the launch party for the book, and it's great to have a chance to come on with you and talk all about it. So my name's Tom Fletcher. I'm a recovering ambassador. I was ambassador to Lebanon at the age of 36 back in 2011 to 2015, and before that I was the foreign policy advisor to 3 prime ministers. In those days, it took 4 years to advise 3 prime ministers. I think now it takes about 3 weeks, given the turnover we have of politicians. But those jobs, but also 25 years in embassies and in diplomacy around the world, gave me a real insight into how it all works, behind the curtain, how diplomacy really works. And I've written a couple of non-fiction books. I left diplomacy and wrote a book called Naked Diplomat, which had no nudity in it, but was all about the way that technology was changing politics, changing statecraft. This was just before Trump arrived and showed us exactly how that was happening. And I wrote another book called 10 Survival Skills for a World in Flux, which was based on 2 years studying the curriculum of the future. What do we need to teach young people in order that they thrive in the 21st century? And in a way, it was those 2 books that led me to writing thrillers, led me to writing crime. It's a weird journey in a way. But I went to see my agent at the time, the great Ed Victor, and said to him, what should I write next? And he said, you need to write crime. And I said, have you got me muddled up? Because there's another Tom Fletcher, the singer from McFly. Maybe you're confusing me with a different one of your authors. And he was like, no, you've got to write a thriller, because you're refusing to tell people, because of the Official Secrets Act and because of the secrecy of your job, what really happens behind the curtain of politics and behind the curtain of embassies and diplomatic life. And no one knows about that, and they want to hear about that. And writing a thriller is a way to bring that to life without breaking the Official Secrets Act and without doing stuff that will jeopardize your security or the security of the country. So off I went. And I went to Italy for 3 weeks and sat in a castle in Umbria and wrote The Ambassador, the first novel, about a guy called Ed Barnes, who's the ambassador in Paris, and a beautiful human rights activist is murdered in his embassy. And it's a crime that no one wants to own. The French and British governments disown it. And he has to go rogue trying to solve that crime, and gets into a lot of scrapes, lots of trouble along the way with his great sidekick, Max Crawford. He's an ex-SAS commander, and he kind of looks after him along the way and does some of the dirty work. Well, they're back again then for this sequel, The Assassin, which just came out today. And in this book, basically, Ed is in exile, really. He's in Nairobi at the High Commission there, serving his time after having got into such trouble in Paris. And he gets involved in a huge kidnapping crisis, something that happens to many of us as ambassadors in our real day job. And he goes in and gets stuck. Naturally, being Ed Barnes, he can't just walk by. He gets stuck in personally and gets into that situation to try and release the hostages, not realizing that one of those hostages is his daughter, his beloved daughter, Steph, who then is kidnapped and disappears. So he goes on the run to try and find her. But along the way, there are a series of assassinations taking place. And it becomes clear that there is a serial killer out there whose motive is to kill the 12 people he believes are most responsible for climate change in the world. If you could pick out not just a subject to live for or a subject to even die for, but a subject that was so important that you had to kill for it, then maybe this is it. And that brings me back to those non-fiction books, because it's really about the way that diplomacy really takes place in an internet age, but also of all those 10 survival skills identified for young people in the curriculum, the most important one, number 10, was how to be a good ancestor. And this book, The Assassin, is really about that choice that we all have to make. What does it mean to be a good ancestor? What does it mean to leave a better life for our descendants? And are Ed Barnes and Max Crawford willing to commit crimes, willing to murder in order to get that outcome, to try and get the climate change deal and try and make the world safer for our descendants? And is that the right thing to do? And along the way, of course, they're battling the Russians, they're battling the Chinese, they're battling a government in the US which looks very like Donald Trump, and having to face some big ethical dilemmas and get themselves out of some pretty hairy situations as well. So it was great fun to write. I loved writing the ambassador in that castle in Umbria. This one I wrote on the terrace here in Portugal, where I am in the middle of a huge storm tonight. And one of the murders, I was just saying to Cass, one of the murders early in the book even takes place on the terrace upstairs. So every time I sit on that terrace having breakfast, I'm worried that the assassin is about to appear over the fence and do for me as well. So it's great fun to write. I really hope that everyone enjoys reading it as well. And I'm really looking forward to a conversation tonight about how diplomacy really works, about the book, and really anything you'd like to cover. So thanks for having me on.
Lovely. My first question, that you work at Oxford, am I right? No?
Yes. So I'm the principal of Hertford College in Oxford, which is, for those who know Oxford, it's the college with the very famous bridge right in the centre of town. We also have a very famous cat, Simpkin, who is the most dangerous cat in Oxford. And if there was a book being written about cat crime, then Simpkin would almost certainly be the villain. But I've been back here. I was a student here in Oxford, and I've been back for 4 years now as the principal of my old college, really thinking about how do we develop young people, how do we help them thrive in the future.
So there's a character in The Assassin who helps Barnes get back into being a diplomat, who's like a retired kind of politician who's gone to academia. Is that a little bit based on you?
I think, like many writers, almost everyone in this book is based on different people in different ways. Each of them is a kind of mosaic where you stitch together different bits of character. And the ambassador, Ed Barnes himself, is based on several ambassadors I've seen close up. Max Crawford, the SAS guy, is based on at least one old friend from that world. And yeah, those academics in Oxford, they're quite familiar characters too. I don't know if I yet I'm a tweedy old Don like that character, but maybe I'm getting there.
I wondered if that was a little nod to like your career path when I read it.
So there are quite a few. You're right. There are quite a few moments in there that are slightly kind of picking up on very specific things that have happened to me or specific people I've worked with in Downing Street. One of the hardest things I find about writing is trying to make sure it is as fictional as possible. I often say about these books that the best bits are all true and the worst bits are made up. But there's something in that.
I think there's something in people who know the inner workings of politics writing sort of some of that into thrillers. Have you ever read the books by Peter Hain where he's written thrillers?
Yeah. So I used to
Like
work with Peter.
he uses like politics to really good effect in them.
I think that's right. I used to work with Peter, and I think a lot of people who've been in that world, hopefully we can bring an authenticity to it because we really understand what that world feels like. We understand the characters, what it really is like behind the curtain. People often think that diplomacy is all about just Ferrero Rocher chocolates and people in black tie and ball gowns at embassy receptions, and it's all very glamorous. Whereas in reality, it's a lot more raw, a lot more gritty. And a lot of what we're working with are crises and intelligence situations. You know, in Lebanon, as ambassador, I had 12 bodyguards the whole time because of the threats to my life. And most mornings I would start the morning reading the intelligence reports of which groups might try to kill me that day. And I had various scrapes where my bodyguards managed to keep me out of that sort of danger. So the reality of that life is much less glamorous than people often think.
Yeah, you've got a little bit of a nod to that in the book as well, haven't you, with Ed? Like he starts his breakfast like not wanting to read that and finding out how he's gonna.
Exactly. So he it kind of turns his stomach a bit when he's having his scrambled eggs and coffee in the morning to read all those reports about how much trouble he's going to get into during the day. And that's very much based on sitting there on the terrace in Beirut and having that experience myself. So there's hopefully it does bring an authenticity to it, and that, as I say, you know, maybe not all the murders, but The other stuff is very close to reality. There are fewer murders in diplomatic life than I've put in my books.
Does the travel and things that you've done help with the writing? Because it's quite a global book that you've written.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously, having lived in Lebanon helped me a lot with the first one, with the ambassador, because a lot of the action takes place in the mountains of above Beirut with warlords and so on. Obviously, working at the embassy in Paris was very helpful. Setting the ambassador in the embassy in Paris, where it begins with that murder at the Queen's birthday party, at the reception at that embassy, and in this one, a lot of the action takes place in Geneva, a city I know very well because I was working on refugee education there for a while. And in Jordan, another country I've traveled around a lot with my family and friends, including to the Dead Sea and into the desert there, where a lot of the action takes place, with Max and Ed racing around trying to save the world at that point. And a lot of the action takes place in Washington. And again, it's a city I know very well and somewhere I've done a lot of work. So I think having done all that travel, it did help me to almost to scaffold the book. It naturally breaks it into sections. And I think one of the reasons that we've been successful with television companies wanting to work with the content of the book is because it does have a kind of cinematic quality of like scenes starting and ending in these various dramatic locations.
Then we're going to come back to that. So we've got some hellos from like Leslie, Tom, Leslie, Karen, TG, Donna has said hello as well.
Hello.
T wants to know who your favourite character is.
In the book, I mean, look, I love Ed Barnes because he doesn't necessarily seek out these adventures. I mean, Ed Barnes is someone whose life is defined by being a kind of fairly easygoing, tolerant sort of person who just wants everyone to get along. And in The Ambassador, and then even more so in The Assassin, he's forced to actually fall back on being a much tougher character in order to defend those values in a world of extremism and polarization, and having to be as sort of muscular and angry in defense of those values as all the people trying to rip things apart. And that's very much the case with the climate change challenge in The Assassin. So I really do like Ed because I love, he loves his family, he's absolutely devoted to his daughter, and so many of the scrapes he gets into are really because he's trying to protect his daughter. Although really all along, as you know, she's really looking out for him. She's much smarter and more savvy in a way, and is actually masterminding a lot of the situations that they're finding themselves in. So I love it, but really, I love Max Crawford, and he, spoiler alert, but in The Ambassador, we were there at his graveside, after he was killed, or seemed to have been killed, saving Ed Barnes's life. And I think, well, again, this is a massive spoiler, I suppose, but I couldn't kill him off completely. So I think we're going to see him popping up again in The Assassin and playing an even more central role in the story. He is great fun because he's as hard as they come. He's a trained killer, but he's also got this sense of mischief to him as well. He's doing it all with a smile on his face, and also with great loyalty. He's driven by real loyalty to his values, but also to his friend Ed Barnes.
T also wants to know what the craziest thing that you've done whilst writing is.
So I've done quite a few interviews where I particularly during lockdown, where I've been dressed from the waist up, but then, like the Naked Diplomat in the book I read first, I've been in my swimming trunks or something from the waist down, and there's always that worry that the camera will slip and you'll be exposed, basically wearing your swimming trunks. Crazy things while writing. I'm quite disciplined with the writing, so I tend to drink a lot of coffee. I tend to get up first thing in the morning and write really, really early, from sort of 6 until 8, before the kids wake up. But probably the craziest way of writing was actually to go to this castle in Umbria, where it was just me in the turret, living with all these bats flying around, eating lots of pasta, drinking lots of red wine, growing a beard, and just submerging myself in the action and in the joy of writing this novel, because I didn't know how to write a novel at that time. I hadn't really thought about it. I had to study the craft. I had to read lots to really work out, what you and the people on this call all understand is that there's a form and a craft to it. There's a way of unveiling the story as you go along. When I started in that turret, I just thought, I'm going to get some great characters. I'm going to put them in exotic locations. We're going to kill a few people, and then let's see what happens. And actually, I had to then completely learn from scratch how to actually write a proper novel, not just throw the characters in and see what happened.
Karen wants to know if using real life can be a hindrance at times.
It can. I mean, so one of the scrapes I've got into with these books is when people feel that a character is too based on them, and or they assume that a scene you might write is something that's definitely happened to me. As I say, everything is linked in some way to reality, but that's a family cottage in Snowdonia where one of the murder happens, and I've never murdered anyone at that cottage, and so I keep having to reassure my family not to worry that there's a body buried out there in the bog outside that cottage. So that is a difficulty. The other difficulty is that you don't want to stereotype anyone by making them the villains. And in diplomacy, the situation isn't black and white. It's not like there are goodies and baddies, and it's not like a James Bond film where it's really easy to say who the bad guys are and the good guys are. So that makes it more complex. A big challenge with diplomacy is that in novels and in thrillers in particular, people want clarity. They want answers. They want a real sense of who they're rooting for. In diplomacy, it's much more complex. There are many more grey areas, and that's a difficult thing to bring through in the book. I was reading one review today, and of course everyone says never read the reviews, and I was happy that this was a very positive review. But the guy said, "Look, the killing was great. The assassinations were great. I loved the action. It's just I didn't like the bits of diplomacy in between." And my argument would be that the diplomacy is what sets the context. That's what makes it authentic. But I think the reader probably just wants more killing and more mayhem, and doesn't need so much diplomacy.
You said that there was some TV interest in it. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So this is all. It's very early days at the stage, and everyone tells me who's involved in that world, you've got to be very, very careful not to assume anything will happen until the thing is actually made. But we've got a big company has. I don't think I'm allowed to say who, but a big company has bought the rights now and is working with writers to turn it into a TV series. The next step then is to try and attach some big name actors and actresses, and I think that sounds as though it's going quite well. So I'm feeling fairly confident that we could see Ed Barnes and Max Crawford on the screen, but as I say, that's heavily caveated that who knows, and many things can go wrong between the deal and the show actually getting made. But I'd be absolutely thrilled if it got made.
Would you make a cameo, like an author cameo in it?
So my son, my 12-year-old, has made me promise that if it gets made, that he'll be in it. So I might have to write a 12-year-old into it, who's going to have to help solve the crime in some way. I'd love to be. I'm hoping that if it gets made, I'll be there on the set, giving them bits of advice. Again, to your point, Kaz, about how do we make it authentic? How do we make it feel like a real embassy, not just like one that's been invented? Many of the TV series you get, aren't like real life diplomacy or real life embassies. So I'd want to be around trying to keep it authentic. I suspect if I was the director of a TV series, I probably wouldn't want the author on the screen. I'd want some real actors involved.
Fair enough. I think some authors do make appearances though in their adaptations, even if they're just in the crowd or.
Yeah, I'd quite like to do that. That when you could be walking through the customs or be a customs officer or something like that, something that didn't involve actual acting. I think that's where they draw the line, is they're not going to want me actually kind of prancing around trying to pretend to be a character. Maybe I could be murdered. I could be one of the people gets murdered early on without saying very much.
With your sort of background and expertise, do you get called on to advise other authors?
Yeah, and so a number of friends from that diplomatic world are writing books as well. And so I talk a lot to them about the process of writing. and the process of editing, of course, which is so difficult to get right, and the process then of getting your books noticed and picked up and talked about and ultimately read. Because when you're a diplomat, you do a lot of writing. You write lots of telegrams back to your capital, and a lot of that is very high quality writing, but not much of it gets read. So when you leave diplomacy to write books about it, you do want people to read it. Otherwise, you're just doing you may as well be back doing the old job. So I do spend a lot of time with people talking about that process, and being honest with them that this isn't something you can just kind of fall into and it just happens. You have to really study the genre, study the craft, and then put the hard yards in. Really put the time into developing those characters, getting the dialogue right, getting the action sufficiently pacey. And along the way, I've had such help from people in understanding how to do that, including some great writers, that basically, I'm very keen to pass that on, to sort of pay that forward to other people that want to crack at it too.
Do you have a sort of a number of books that you will write with Ed in mind? Because you put him through quite a lot, don't you, in the book? Like, I'm gonna say, like, I don't know how many he can survive.
Yeah, and he's not getting any younger, is he, either? So I definitely feel there's another one, because there are lots of loose ends actually in his life to tidy up, and there are some other characters coming through. Orla Fitzgerald, Steph, his daughter, Max Crawford, of course, who I think could do even more of the heavy lifting. But I think Ed's got at least one more adventure to come, and I quite like the idea of it being a series, but a series that has kind of a natural start and end that gives the reader some closure across the whole series. I've always loved the Patrick O'Brian books, and I think there are about 19 of those. I think that's too many for Ed to sustain, but certainly 3. He can manage one more adventure at least.
Would you do any like spin-off novellas, sort of have a Steph-led story?
Yeah, like, that would be really fun, actually.
While I was dead. No.
I think that would be really fun, because she's a very complex character, and as I say, she's probably she is the smartest of the bunch. So she could certainly spin off, and she's never going to be a diplomat. She's far too. She has far too sort of vocal values. Really, she's more of she wants to be an activist. She wants to really be out there changing the world. She wouldn't be able to kind of hide her feelings enough to be a classic diplomat, but she can certainly be out there making life very difficult for the diplomats and forcing them, as she forces Ed to actually be a better version of themselves. So I think Steph would be a great spin-off. I love Orla as well, who is this really sassy Irish journalist who's always looking for like the new angle on the story, and a proper kind of old school intrepid journalist. And it's interesting with both Steph and Orla in The Assassin, all the main characters have to make a serious compromise on their values and on their career in order to get the prize that they're all working towards. And I quite like that tension in that idea of what are you prepared to give up for something that we must never give up? What will you sacrifice for the things that we must not sacrifice? And I think you could do much more of that with both Orla and with Steph.
You've also been asked what your favourite country is to work in.
Oh, so the embassy in Paris is just spectacular. And there's the scene in The Ambassador where I talk about, walking through that embassy on the way to reception, and it's just breathtaking. It blows your mind every time. So I think that's the best building to work in the world. Look, there's a lot of action in New York. There's a lot of action in Washington, obviously. But I think, and I've noticed talking to lots of ambassadors at the end of their career, many of them will say that the most fun jobs are when they're in slightly smaller places, kind of medium-sized embassies. So I'm gonna say Beirut. I had a blast there. I got there, I was 36, and I did 4 years. So I was there until I was 40, and the adventures we went through, you know, we had the Syria civil war around us, and we were trying to protect Lebanese stability from what was going on across the border in Syria. We were working out how to evacuate Brits when things went badly wrong. We were dealing with horrible terrorist attacks. You know, those sorts of adventures were really, you know, really big things to live through. But I just had this amazing team there, this brilliant team of military people, of development aid people, of commercial crisis people, of all the Lebanese colleagues who worked with us in the embassy as well. So that's the one I'd always go back to, the kind of that mixture in Lebanon of the glamour and the danger. And those two things were always very close together. And that's what I've been trying to do in these books, is to capture the glamour and the danger and the way that they interact.
Donna has spun off from that, and she says, if there are any countries you've worked in you'd like to go back to as a tourist, or have they been tainted by your work?
So I'd recommend Lebanon to anyone. I go back to Paris once a year, you know, to get my fix of Paris, because it was where I got married, when my first son was born. You know, it has very special memories for us. You know, Jordan plays a big part in The Assassin, and I would definitely go back there. Beautiful country, and very manageable. You can kind of get around and get to everything in all the highlights in a week. So that's a really good trip to do. And high on my list now is I'm going to Singapore in a couple of weeks' time, and that's probably the most sort of interesting country that I haven't visited so far. So that's been very high on my list. I also recommend, just talking about it this evening, I really recommend Iceland. And I have a feeling that Ed Barnes is going to get up to some mischief in Iceland in the next book. It's a great place for a few murders to happen.
It's weirdly magical, Iceland, isn't it? It's like this really special place because it's really easy to get to, but also really like so different to anywhere you've ever been.
Yeah, completely. It's completely right. It's spot on. It gets, and that, you know, the volcanoes and the ice close together, and that, yeah, that feeling of it being like stepping back in time. You know, because it's so wild and so bleak, and I think that would probably quite suit a thriller.
Yeah, I can see that working really well. But yeah, I know what you mean as well. It's a really special place. What drew you into sort of a life as a diplomat to begin with?
Yeah, so I travelled quite a bit, and my family, my grandfather had lived overseas all his life. My parents both had travelled a lot, so I guess there was a travel bug in my DNA, in my genes. And then before going to university, I spent a year as a teacher in the Middle East. You know, before becoming a diplomat, I was a failed teacher, a failed door-to-door salesman, a failed boxer. I had a fight in Kenya against the mayor of Nairobi in front of 3,000 people who were all chanting "Fletcher goes home on a stretcher." A failed singer in a band called Freshly Squeezed. So I failed at lots of different things, but one of them was to have this year overseas in the Middle East, and that gave me a real taste for that region and for foreign policy and statecraft. And so when in my final year at university I was trying to work out what to do, that seemed like a pretty good idea. And when you apply for the Foreign Office, it's very, very competitive, and I can't remember what the numbers were, but it was like 1 in 100 people or so. And so I didn't think I didn't think I had a chance of getting it. And I was sure I was going to fall at the next hurdle each time. And so I was just stunned when they finally offered me the job. But it takes about 9 months going through all those different bits of the process. And then what they do, they get in touch and they say, give us the names of 3 people from your life so we can go and ask them what you're really like. And so obviously you give them 3 people who you know will say nice things. You know, your best friend from home, your best friend from university, someone in the family will all say, he's, you know, super sensible, you know, hardworking, diligent. But what they do is they go to those 3 people and they ask them for 3 more, and then 3 more, and 3 more, until they fan out far enough where they can find people who you don't know that well, but will tell them what you're really like. And the reason for doing that is they want to have enough information on you that if you are then approached blackmailed by a foreign power, that actually they'll have all the material on you already, that nothing would surprise them. Nothing that a foreign power would find out about you would surprise the Foreign Office or the intelligence services. So that bit of the process takes 3 to 6 months as well. And then someone came to see me in my garden and said, you know, here's some things, we've got some questions for you. Did this ever happen? Did this ever happen? And you become aware of how much they really know, but they're also checking if you'll be honest with them. And then she got into her car and I said, well, I'll see you one day. She said, no, you'll never see me again. And off she drove. And that was the last I saw of her. But I got through that vetting process and then into the Foreign Office, and the rest is history.
It's fascinating talking. Sorry, it's like fascinating talking to you and listening to the process. I didn't know it was that complicated.
Yeah, I think it's a bit easier now, but those same pressures remain, that they can't have a situation where you could be compromised or blackmailed because of something they don't know. So it's very important for security reasons that they have a really good picture of what you're really like.
So when did the working in Downing Street come in? Was that before or after you'd worked in places like Lebanon?
I'm sorry, where did the working in?
Where did the working sort of as an advisor in Downing Street come in?
So that was after I'd spent 4 years in Kenya and 4 years in Paris, and 4 years working all over Africa with the Minister for Africa, so traveling a lot around there. And that's why the book starts in Kenya, because I know Kenya really well from bumping around that amazing country as a young guy in my early 20s. But having done those jobs, I got called back from Paris to work for Tony Blair in the last few months that he was in Downing Street, and then stayed on and worked for Gordon Brown for the entire time that he was there as Prime Minister, and then the first year of David Cameron as Prime Minister. And so I got to see those three very different Prime Ministers, all extraordinary people, very close up, but also to be with them for all of their meetings with world leaders, and all their telephone calls with world leaders. Anything they were doing on foreign policy, I'd be there with them. And along the way, I collected this book of advice for my son, Charlie. So at the time, I very rarely saw Charlie. He was, 3, 4 years old. And I was just on the road, I was on the plane, non-stop. So I would go up to these leaders and I'd get them to write a page of advice. So we got 4 US presidents: Mandela, Gorbachev, Tutu, Beckham, Pele. Barack Obama read the book when he was writing his entry, and he said, your son Charlie is either going to be very rich or very clever, depending on whether he sells the book or reads the book. And they each wrote a page of advice. And we have that book locked in a safe, safely locked away. No one can steal that. I'm saying that now. For my son, it belongs to him now. But I gave it to him on his 14th birthday because it was advice for him. But I got to spend time close up with all those amazing people. And that was a real privilege. And a lot of that then finds its way into the books. And in The Assassin, the climax is at one of these big international conferences, and there's a lot of murder going on, which doesn't normally happen at these conferences, but there's also a bit of diplomacy in between as well. And the question that Barnes has to really grapple with is, does the outcome of the conference, a climate change deal, is that so important that actually killing a few people to get it is justified?
Donna says that's given her goosebumps. What a gift.
Oh, thank you, Donna. He's really pleased with it. And as he gets older, it means more and more to him and more to me as well, because it brings me back to that time when I just felt I was away from him so much, and that this was something tangible that I could show him later to try to explain why it had been worth it. The other kind of link with my boys is that when I was in Lebanon, I talked about reading all the intelligence reports of all the people trying to kill me and so on. There was one particular one where the threat was very severe, and we were very worried about a very specific targeting of me at a very specific event. And so that morning, before going to the event, in the convoy, I sat down and wrote letters to my sons just in case, the things I would like them to know if I didn't come back. And that was a very tough thing to do. It really forces you to think about who you are and where you've come from and what you want to leave behind. And it was such a tough thing to do. And that letter is the basis, actually, of a letter that then Max Crawford writes his son in The Ambassador. A lot of the authenticity and the emotion of that moment goes into the letter that Max sends to his boys as well.
They I quite like how it's formatted in The Assassin. I've not read The Ambassador. Where there's like little messages kind of sent back and forth, and you've got it as like a text message or a letter. It's like formatted kind of a bit differently. That's quite nicely done in the book.
Good. And in a way, I hope it breaks it up a bit, because our attention spans are all getting shorter, aren't they? So you need kind of different. I think it's quite good to play with different formats. And of course, the reality of diplomacy is that lots of it is on WhatsApps, and lots of it is in different forms of communication. It's not all just kind of long prose. So I did want to capture some of that to try and keep the pace moving. And then I was also told very early on by a very wise writer, keep the chapters short. People want that sense of momentum and pace in a book. So the chapters are never more than 2,000 words long.
The other thing I found really interesting was in the big kind of conference. I know you say there's not murders and stuff at them, but there was a lot of like discussion about the fact that the bits that you see isn't where like the important stuff is happening. That's all behind the scenes.
Yeah,
In
that's
the
definitely the case. Definitely the case. So often you have around the table, you might have the 8 leaders. And at some of these conferences, the big G20 conference in 2009 that we hosted in London, that Gordon Brown hosted in response to the financial crash, I was the only advisor in the room with like 20 world leaders. And so I could really see close up the dynamic of how those conferences work. But what normally happens is there's a different room with all the Sherpas, as they're called, and they're the advisors that get the leader to the summit. So it's like a sort of Nepalese Sherpa getting you up the summit of the mountain. And yeah, most of the real decisions are taken in those meetings and in the preparatory meetings. But then you leave your leader a kind of nugget that only she or he can get in the final negotiation. And there are some things that take that kind of political capital and that sense of political leverage that politicians really understand, that only they can get themselves and the advisors can't get. But yeah, there's a whole dynamic between the leaders' room and then the advisors' room, and the interchange between the two, which I've tried to capture a bit at the end of The Assassin.
Is the thing with badges a real thing as well?
Yes, yeah. I used to always have to because Gordon, because he was quite short-sighted. It was often important I was with him going through all the different meeting rooms, and to do that, I'd sometimes have to steal a badge that said security, or sometimes steal a badge that said interpreter, because there were rooms into which the advisors couldn't go. But I would carry on going because I'd have all these different badges I'd be swapping around as I walked along with the Prime Minister. And sometimes, a security guard would try to stop me, and Gordon Brown would kind of almost sort of push me into the room ahead of him, so that because the security guard couldn't obviously stop the Prime Minister. So we had all sorts of tricks for getting into meetings and getting into spaces that wasn't supposed to get into. I've kept all those badges, by the way. I've got them all. I'm going to make a big kind of montage of them because they're made. 4 years of badges. It's a great souvenir.
Yeah, I can imagine. Are you allowed to take them out then? Your
Yeah,
badges, are you allowed to keep them?
because once the conference is over, the badge doesn't have any kind of security value at that stage, so you can keep them all as souvenirs. I couldn't take the one badge I'd love to have kept is the one that gives you the access to the nuclear bunkers under London. If there's ever a nuclear attack. Unfortunately, I lost that when I left Downing Street.
When we went down to the Houses of Parliament and they give you like a visitor's badge thing, but we had to hand them back, which was really sad. I was like, that would have been nice to keep.
I'm sorry to hear that. I will get you a House of Commons business badge to say thank you for having me on today.
Thank you. It was just, yeah, I was like, I have a habit of keeping all the ones from wherever I've gone and like hanging them on stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Don't worry, there's one in the post.
thank you. I like to ask everyone who comes on what they've read recently and really enjoyed.
So a book that really influenced The Assassin was a book called Ministry of the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson, and it's a sort of cli-fi book, climate fiction book, in which he's imagining a world, 20 years on, where they're coming up with all sorts of innovations to deal with climate change. But in it, there is this idea that there'd be a terrorist group that is actually also carrying out attacks against airlines and oil companies and so on. And that gave me the idea for the assassin who's basically taking out the people that he thinks are responsible for climate change. So that has had a massive impact on me. And I've just been reading Doris Kearns Goodwin's biography of Lincoln recently, rereading that, which is, I think, the best biography I've ever read. I tend to read a lot of non-fiction. I read a lot of biographies and really enjoy those.
Okay. You I noticed you'd mentioned Kim Stanley Robinson in the acknowledgements. So
That's right. So I've become a fan of his, and actually, we're doing an event in June where he's coming over to Oxford, and we're bringing together lots of different academics who've been inspired or challenged by his work. I'm very lucky in Oxford to work with lots of people who are real academics, real writers. So at the college we have, for example, Emma Smith, who writes brilliant books on Shakespeare. I recommend This Is Shakespeare. She wrote a lovely book for people who love books, love the process of reading and the kind of physical contact with a book. She wrote an amazing book called Portable Magic, all about our relationship with books. And then we have academics working on artificial intelligence, Mike Waldridge, who's just on the Christmas lectures, Carissa Leith, who writes about artificial intelligence and ethics. Some amazing people. So I get to sit there at lunch each day, surrounded by these real writers and real thinkers. And I think that must rub off in the writing I do, because it stimulates you, it gives you ideas. That collision of ideas is really important for the writing process.
So this book kind of tackles climate change and things. Would you pick another kind of current hot topic to address in another novel?
Yeah, I mean, so I I nearly got there in this one, but then held it back. But I think there's that real dilemma about what happens if we get a rogue American president. If you've got Trump 2.0 coming back, angrier, more narcissistic, more dangerous, and really threatening the values of the UK, of NATO, and so on. What would that mean for a UK ambassador? What would Ed Barnes do in that situation? Because he can't just carry on as usual. So I think that's one big crisis I'd like to have a think about, is a rogue US president, and we may have some very live materials to work with fairly soon.
Let's hope not. You've
Let's
got
hope.
yeah, you've got quite a character in Hoon, haven't you? With that,
Yeah, she's awful, isn't she? So she's the American president. She's quite Trumpy, actually. And in an earlier draft, she was a he, and was even more Trumpy. And then, to come to your earlier question about that difficulty of writing stuff that's close to reality, you don't want characters, I don't think, who are too obviously based on someone. You don't want people to read that and think, "Oh, that's Donald Trump," or that's David Cameron, or Rishi Sunak or something. You want people to be able to imagine a character, not know a character in that way. And so that's why she ended up being Elizabeth Hoon and being a little bit less Trumpy, but she's still pretty nasty and pretty narcissistic and pretty dangerous.
yeah, she's awful, isn't she? But in a kind of fun way in the book, but you wouldn't want it to exist in real life.
No.
Donna said you've got such a wide range of knowledge. What would your mastermind specialist subject be?
My mastermind specialist subject. Well, I'm writing a non-fiction book on Viscount Palmerston, who was the British Foreign Secretary. So it might be that, but I haven't really finished all my research yet, so perhaps not yet. West Ham Football Club, Kent Cricket Club in the 1980s. Be pretty good on the various different players who played for Kent Cricket Club in that time. And I think modern Lebanese politics. I'm pretty good on Lebanese politics.
Interesting. We play it at our school sometimes, Mastermind, and I really enjoy writing the specialist subject rounds.
That's quite tough though, isn't it? I mean, you've got to do some serious research.
It is quite tough, and the kids always pick really random things. So I have learned a lot about things like really random bus companies and stuff that I don't ever need to know anything about. But it's
So
always fun.
is your specialist subject crime then?
No,
Crime novels.
no, I don't know what my specialist subject would be, but yeah, it's quite fun to write them.
Yeah.
If
And
you
try
don't.
and are you trying to catch them out? You're trying to find the thing
Oh yeah,
that
yeah.
they don't know.
And then you always know the ones that really know it because they like even the really hard things are like that was just too easy.
Yeah, I'd be terrified going on. So my college team does quite well on University Challenge, and in fact, Amal Rajan, the presenter, I think he wanted them to win. To be honest, he maybe can't admit that out loud, but he got on really well with them, and I watched the show with them afterwards, and between us on this call, I wouldn't have got a single question right on the whole of that episode. And so I sat around with these students that I'm meant to be teaching and leading, and I was just in awe of them because their brains are a different size to mine.
You've also been asked what your internet search history says about you.
It says I'm interested in Viscount Palmerston, Lebanese politics, how to write crime thrillers, and how we can avoid having President Trump coming back in America. I actually writing that first book where, and I'm sure this is what the question's about. One of the things that the villain is doing is releasing people's internet search history in order to embarrass public figures. Since writing that, I've been even more careful about my time online because I pretty much assume that that's all being monitored by someone. My phone, I don't. Well, here it is. I used to think, or I used to understand that my phone was listened to by 9 different countries. Certainly when I was working in 10 Downing Street, and so that can have quite a chilling effect on your conversations. And there was one time when my wife was so angry about the fact I was on my phone the whole time that she picked it up at one point and said, "If the Russians are out there, they can come and get me." So yeah, we were conscious that we were being eavesdropped on all the time.
That must make you quite cautious about some of the things that you do online, I guess. Like I think people use things even if you know that a little bit more
Yeah,
sort of thingy than you would, if you know what I mean. I can't word that correctly, sorry.
yeah, no, you're right though. There's I mean, I think people should be very cautious online. I mean, not because the Russians are necessarily listening in, but just because of the way our data is being used, and that's the real theme of the ambassador, the way that people's data patterns can be turned against them and used against them, even if actually much of what they're doing is not a crime, but there's enough of it that would be slightly embarrassing to them in different ways in the wrong hands, or if it turned up at the breakfast table in front of their family. So yeah, I think I would definitely counsel being very cautious online.
Excellent. I don't think that was where that question was going, but that's a really interesting thing to say. You wouldn't think about people's search histories being used against them, but that's quite like an ingenious
So that's
idea.
what this villain. So in the ambassador Pedersen, who's this Danish internet activist, he's basically picking on public figures and trying to expose their hypocrisy particularly by looking at their search history, and showing what they're really like. And he does enormous damage to lots of public figures as a result. So that's a kind of a warning from fiction.
Interesting. So you're working on the non-fiction right now. Do you have any other? So when you finish this series, like it sounds like you got one more book of that. Do you have any other kind of fiction you would like to write? Any other kind of standalones or anything like that?
Well, I'd love to carry on writing. I love the process of writing. I was writing an article today on the world in 2040 and the kind of foreign policy machinery that we'll need as the UK in response to that. And having not written for a few weeks, it was just, it was kind of liberating to be writing again. I love that feeling of putting words on the page and the satisfaction you get after a couple of hours when you see the work you've done. So I'm addicted now. I don't think I can stop writing. I'll certainly do this non-fiction book as well. There's a book I'm writing at the moment on the peace processes of the future, peace with our planet, peace with technology, peace between the generations, peace with our ancestors, which is about healing the wounds of history, peace with big tech. How do we constrain these big tech companies who are packaging up all our internet searches in the way we've just described? So that's in the works as well. And then I definitely want to come back to fiction again. Whether it's with Ed Barnes, maybe I could find a younger Ed Barnes, go back to slightly earlier in his career, or maybe we spin off with Steph or Orla, or we just let Max carry on doing what he does best and going around killing people for good reasons.
You've been asked if you'll be at any of the crime festivals or events over the summer.
I will be. Let's see. So I'm not doing the Hay Festival this year. I'm very keen to do a few. I've just done Oxford. We had a fantastic event at the Sheldonian last week at the Oxford Literary Festival. I've done lots of the festivals in the past, but haven't got plans this summer. So, but if anyone out there is keen to have me to come along and bang on about these books, I'll be on the first train in that direction. I love the process of writing, but I also love meeting the people who are actually experiencing the books and hearing from them, their reactions, and it changes the way I think about the characters as I see them through the eyes of the readers. And so the more interaction, the better.
There's a lot of very good crime festivals that are worth having
What would
a
you
look
recommend?
at. Well, the one near me is Harrogate. That's quite a good one. It tends to get all the sort of authors and readers together in a nice way. Like you can go and enjoy the panels, but you can just go and mix with people as well, which is really good.
Excellent. Right. Well, look out for me at that one then.
Yeah. I don't know when the other ones are. There's Crime Fest in Bristol. I think that's quite a big one. And Capital Crime in London. That's probably closer to you in Oxford.
Yeah. Sounds good. They do a crime day at the Oxford Literature Festival, which I did last year, which was good fun. I'm still getting used to the idea that I'm a crime writer, because in my head I'm just a diplomat and then a college principal. But now, particularly if I do a third one, I'm going to have to get used to the idea of being a whole new world out there of people who love this stuff.
As a college principal, do you lecture as well about writing or foreign policy and things like that?
So I do a course which is called Head, Hand and Hartford, which looks at, it really draws on the lessons of that book, 10 Survival Skills for a World in Flux, which was thinking about, what are the skills we have to pass on to the next generation. So it's a 2-week course. I've just taught it actually, where we learn about head, hand and heart, about knowledge, skills and values. And I love doing it. It's incredibly energizing. You learn so much from the young people that you're with, and we think about how to be kind, how to be curious, how to be brave, how to be a good ancestor, how to find purpose. I do a class called How to Give a Speech Anytime, Anywhere with No Preparation. We think about all those sort of what I think are really essential life skills, which you wouldn't necessarily get at school or at university. And it's a brilliant interactive couple of weeks, and as I say, I love it.
Fascinating. Do you also get to do the handing out degrees and things at the end?
So there's a little bit of that. We do a bit of parading. There's one lovely thing we call matriculation, where all of my new students each year, so there'll be about 200 that they all line up in their subfusk, so they're kind of with their white bow ties and their hats, little mortarboard hats, and in their gowns, and they line up all the way under the famous bridge. And then I lead a procession of them into the Sheldonian Theatre, and they have a little bit of Latin and so on. And then as they walk out, they're members of Oxford University. And so it's their kind of rite of passage, it's their arrival as students of the university. And that's a really powerful moment for them. So we do, yeah, there's a bit of ceremony. I get to be Dumbledore a bit and put on my big gown and do some Latin.
That's quite an interesting sort of change from solving crises. And
yeah, it really is. I mean, there's some. So when I went for the job, one of the professors said to me, "Have you had an experience of negotiation in the interview?" And I said, "Well, apart from negotiating with the IRA and warlords in the Middle East, I guess not very much." And he said, "I think you'll find this will be much, much harder, because there's a sense that you're mediating between these different political factions in a common room, between academics and so on. A lot of that is quite exaggerated, but there are some similarities. But also, like being a diplomat, you're still dealing with lots of crises. We've got all sorts of crises that will hit us in a college, each year, or in the university. So a lot of it is about having those skills and having the resilience and the patience to kind of work through those moments. So yeah, thankfully, touch wood, so far there are fewer murders than in the book, fewer murders in education and in diplomacy, but they're not so different.
that's a line that you wrote into the book as well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. There's definitely a lot of crossover.
We've got about 3 minutes left, so remind people, you've got them behind you. Maybe
Yes.
show off some of the books.
Let me grab these then. So I've been told to hold these up and wave them around on everything this morning, everything today. This is The Ambassador. That's the first one, starting in the embassy in Paris with the murder of a beautiful activist, human rights activist, at Ed Barnes's house, Ed Barnes's residence. And then out today, fresh out, is The Assassin, the sequel, where Ed Barnes goes on the run, trying to track down the hostage takers who've taken his daughter captive, and then on the trail of an assassin who's wiping out the people responsible for climate change. And he's faced with some big dilemmas about what it means to be a good ancestor. He has to solve those murders, but also try and get a climate change deal, and ultimately avert World War III. So there's plenty for him to be getting on with, and loads of adventure along the way. And so I really hope that people get their hands on a copy, and I'd love to hear what you think of it. Let me know.
Are they available in audio?
Yes, so they're also on Kindle and on audio. As I say, this one, The Ambassador, should be on the TV soon, and who knows, if that goes well, maybe The Assassin too, but that's a long way down the road.
Oh, this is a good comment. Someone said they'll be getting the first and hope to see you at Harrogate so you can sign it.
Brilliant. I would love to do that. And do come and find me at events. Tell me what you think of them. Tell me if you want more of characters, less of characters. I'm always keen to have ideas of people to kill in the books. So tell me if you've got people you want me to kill. I always quite enjoy killing off lots of horrible people. And I'm always keen to get ideas for locations as well. So if you've got good venues for Ed Barnes, Max Crawford action, then do let me know.
Excellent. It's been such a pleasure to have you on.
Well, thank you so much, Kaz, and thank you everyone who's been on. And it's a real pleasure to do this. This is the last one I'm doing today, and it's the one I've most enjoyed. So thank you so much for this opportunity to be with you this evening, and for sharing my after party launch drink. Thank you.
You're welcome.